Welcome to Mr. Chalk's Revision Tips.
When answering exam questions, there are a few key things to remember, right? So just remember, exam technique is a key part in preparation for any exams, and it's something that you'll pick up the more you go and you do past papers. Right, so many questions in exams are repeats of what will be in old exams. So going and looking at lots of generic questions beforehand is a good idea. When going and answering and questions and reading them, there's a few things just take into account. Make sure you go read the question at least twice so you don't make any mistakes when you're reading them. As you're reading them, go highlight key information. Don't make assumptions about what the question is asking. Make sure after you've answered it, you go check your work for daft errors that you might make. And if it involves going and answering something where there's some calculation, make sure that you write your workings out down. Right, let's go and have a look at the question.
So hopefully you have found that useful. If you've got any questions, then drop it in the comments below, and we'll be uploading a lot more. Right, good luck, folks. So when we go and look like cellulose, there's a few key things that we need to go and remember. Right, so start off with cellulose is made up of 1,000 beta-glucose subunits, right, and they connect via a beta-1,4-glycosidic bond. So unlike other polysaccharides, the orientation of the glucose molecules in cellulose is reversed. So they have a beta orientation in which the hydroxyl group of the carbon, or the carbon number 1, is directed above the plane of the glucose ring. So in order to make a 1,4-glycosidic bond, every alternative glucose molecule in the cellulose is inverted. So the hydroxyl group of carbon 1 is directed upwards, and that of carbon 4 is directed downwards. So to go and make that beta-1,4-glycosidic bond, one of these molecules should be inverted so that both hydroxyl groups come into contact in the same plane. Right. So cellulose is a unbranched molecule, quite importantly. So the glucose are arranged in a linear pattern, so unlike that of glycogen or starch, for instance. So these chains undergo no coiling, and they don't form a helix formation or any other branching formation. So hydrogen bonds are formed between these chains. Due to these hydrogen bonds, that makes it very, very strong because there's lots of them that go and hold it together. So individual hydrogen bonds form between the microfibrils in cellulose. So we can see there that is one cellulose molecule. Right, so cellulose is present in plants, and it's what goes and makes cell walls and such forth. So if we just go and look at some other key bits, right, cellulose is very, very abundant in nature in general. Right, it's insoluble in water, which is important. It's got a very, very high tensile strength, right, because there's lots of hydrogen bonds that hold the strands or the microfibrils together. Cellulose, if you go and make it artificially, it does form kind of a white powdery substance. And the alternate arrangement of glucose molecules in cellulose also contributes to its high tensile strength. It is, however, soluble in some organic solvents. So we go and we have a look at some questions then. So in this first question, so it says that cellulose is a polysaccharide produced by plants. Cellulose is formed from beta-glucose monomers. So the figure below shows a section of cellulose. Right, quite often they'll go and they'll get you to compare it against something that you might not necessarily have come across before. It's also worth pointing out when you've got a structure that looks kind of like that, so where it goes and it bows in like that, that is representative of where coiling is happening. So we're looking at describing the differences between the structure of cellulose and cellulose. The key things is talk about where the glycosidic bonds are. You need to talk about the fact that the cellulose is branched, whereas cellulose isn't. Cellulose is helical, whereas the cellulose isn't. And some sort of idea that you can talk about the fact in cellulose that they're not rotated in that 180 degree plane. Right, second part, so plant cell walls are made of cellulose. Cellulose is a polymer of beta glucose. Right, give 3 properties. So remember those properties that we looked at earlier. So things like it's insoluble, it's unreactive, it's got a high tensile strength, it's relatively flexible, and it can form hydrogen bonds with neighbouring chains. Right, this second question, it says that cellulose is a polysaccharide that is present in living organisms. Right, we know that. So if you're completing the following table, you're comparing this time amylose to cellulose. So it's already given you the fact that amylose is coiled and cellulose isn't. So some of the other key things are that amylose contains alpha glucose, whereas cellulose contains beta. Talk about where the glycosidic bonds are. You can go talk about the fact that in amylose all of the monomers are in the same direction, whereas in cellulose they're alternate. You can talk about this fact that cellulose is fibrous, whereas amylose is non-fibrous. And talk about the fact that cellulose has hydrogen bonds between adjacent molecules is important. So finally, it talks about which properties in cellulose make it suitable for forming cell walls. So think about things that we need for cell walls. So the fact that it's got a high tensile strength and it can form hydrogen bonds between adjacent fibrils, which goes and holds them together.